Good evening, citizens. My name is Ban Shattersong, captain of the Bloody Hands Mercenary Company. And as we take our steady steps closer towards Anvil and seeing our friends and perhaps rivals once more, I will help you untangle the sense, if you will, the messages in the winds that carry fortune upon them. Now this one takes us back to the Khazar Straits, and with the invasion of Feroz by the Grendel, it's not just territory that changes hands. The people, the culture, and of course the relics. And this one, well, just take a listen and you'll see what I mean. The Isle of Orsini sits at the southern reach of Feroz in the Khazar Straits. It isn't easy to reach. The currents and the winds seem to actively dislike helping boats find these unwelcoming shores. It's known for two things: thick sea fogs and stories of ghosts. For centuries there have been tales about the haunted Isle of the Orsini, plagued by the spirits of dead pirates and the malign shades of those who sought to do harm to the freeborn. The rare travellers who visited the isle speak of the cloying mist that rolls across the headlands, and in which the shadows of orc raiders can sometimes be seen. When the sea is becalmed, visitors claim that the creaking of rigging and the grinding sound of anchors being dropped echo from the empty waters. For centuries, a reclusive order of freeborn priests have dwelt on the island and dedicated themselves to the task of dealing with the malign presences that came to its shore. The situation changed, however, in spring 383, year of the Empire, when the Grendel conquered the Khazar Straits. They quickly overran the Isle of the Orsini, imprisoned the freeborn living there, and began turning the island to their own purposes. Fortunately, a small group of priests were able to escape with the aid of corsairs from the nearby town of Shantarim. They brought a worrying tale to the civil service, speaking of ancient white granite pillars that bound the ghosts of pirates and reavers to the isle. Orc ghosts and Grendel ghosts. Ghosts that the people of the Broken Shore could press into service to wreak havoc during their conquest of Feroz. The military council used a major conjunction of the Sentinel Gate to send a force of imperial heroes to the Isle of Orsini to exorcise these pillars and prevent the Grendel mastering the ghosts bound within. They were successful, but none of the priests who lived there, the Justicars as they called themselves, came back to Anvil. In the months since, no further word from the Isle or the stranded Justicars has been heard. During the autumn equinox, as part of the Grendel Treaty, the Imperial Fleet Master arranged a meeting between the Orc ambassador, known as Speaker Morna, and the freeborn priest Fiena y Villazados y Guerra, to discuss the Isle of the Orsini and the Justicars remaining there. The speaker himself had no particular awareness of what had been happening on the isle, but allegedly did his best to negotiate in good faith. The result was a contract, intended apparently to serve as a codicil to the main treaty, securing certain provisions relating to the isle. Specifically, a group of up to 100 priests or Justicars would be allowed to return to the island and minister the unquiet dead there. Shortly after the equinox, a small party of freeborn arrived on the island to discover what had happened in the months since imperial heroes had last visited. They found few signs of the people who had once lived there. The isle had been claimed by a coven of Grendel magicians who were just putting the finishing touches to a squat tower of white granite and mithril that they had built at the heart of the island. The cloisters used by the Justicars had been repurposed as a garrison for the Broken Shore orcs and their slaves. The white granite pillars that once bound the dead were no more. It appeared that after the Imperial heroes had exorcised all the ghosts that had once been bound to them, the Grendel took the precaution of destroying what remained. The leader of the Orc Coven, Saltbinder Grekodeh, explained that given the pillars' purpose as to trap the souls of dead orcs, and particularly Grendel orcs, they had been destroyed within days of the spring solstice. The remaining freeborn on the island were killed in the fighting, during and after the battle between the Empire and the Grendel. Saltbinder and his coven were less than happy that the land that they had claimed would be shared with the freeborn priests, and there were tense exchanges between the orc magicians and both the freeborn visitors and their Grendel escort. In the end, a compromise was reached. The priests would be able to establish an enclave on the northern coast and left to their own devices, as long as they extended the same courtesy to the orc magicians. Saltbinder and his coven were clear that they would not give up the Regio they had claimed, nor provide access to it, under any circumstances. The ritual site was not covered by any treaty, and it was also an important military objective, in addition to being their new home. So there is now a small contingent of Brass Coast priests and their companions on the Isle of Orsini. They're free to practice their religion and their ceremonies, but their community exists under the watchful eye of Saltbinder and his warriors. They're able to come and go as they wish, but for their own safety, Governor Rahab has requested that any ships visiting the island do so with Grendel escort, to ensure that there are no accidents. The magicians observe the priests, and the priests observe the magicians. The Grendel are practitioners of the little regarded magic of salt, which is described as the art of ending punishment and oaths. They've come to the island to make use of the Regio at its heart, which, while not especially strong by imperial standards, has a particular affinity for speaking to the dead. The isle itself, though, is quiet, and according to the remaining Justicars, the ghosts adrift in the Bay of Catazar would be trapped here by white stone pillars if they came too close to the isle. The Justicars studied the arts of exorcism and used them to release any ghosts which they identified as being human rather than orc, or to deal with any malevolent phantom that escaped the pillars' binding. With the pillars destroyed, there is nothing to call the ghosts of the bay to the isle, or to trap them there. The former locations of the white granite monoliths were examined under the watchful eye of the Grendel magicians. The rubble clearly had no particular provenance, neither magical nor spiritual. In an unguarded moment, though, one of the Grendel magicians opined that they had used magic of sky, sand, and salt to call and bind the dead like stone anchors, keeping them in the world for some reason. It was clear the Grendel was not impressed. There is no indication of how the monoliths might be rebuilt, but the pillars predate the arrival of the freeborn in the Khazar Straits, and the Justicars themselves never understood precisely how they worked, or who had constructed them in the first place. While the white granite pillars are gone, there are no more restless spirits here. The isolated location makes the island conducive to study and meditation, providing an opportunity for those who wish to study and learn the arts of exorcism, an opportunity to practice their developing skills. There is a weight of tradition here as well. Several well-thumbed scrolls and books offering guidance to priests dealing with dangerous spirits, and several have already been brought back from the Saltbinder, who has no use for them. The treaty with the Grendel represents an opportunity to establish a small community of freeborn priests dedicated to studying magic and priestly rites for dealing with the unquiet dead. Any community will never be large. The treaty limits their numbers to 100, and the Isle would never be large enough to support a town in any instance. But fortunately, ghosts are a rare occurrence in the Brass Coast. Perhaps because of that, the freeborn in general take little interest in them. However, those rare few who are interested in such things now have a place they can travel to, where they can study with like-minded fellows, provided they are prepared to risk the ever-present threat of the Grendel repeating the purge of the island that followed in the spring equinox last year, of course. During the autumn equinox of 383, the Freeborn Assembly passed a statement of principle upholding a call by Fina y Fijados y Guerra to bring together the remaining Justicars and expand their numbers into a force dedicated to laying the dead to rest. While the Justicars left behind on the Isle are gone, those who fled the Isle to bring word of the Grendel activities to Anvil have survived. The group have no esoteric knowledge and no special abilities, but most are capable exorcists and have skills comparable to a highborn steward of the dead. However, there are a few priests across the Brass Coast who take an interest in exorcism. With the support of their nation, they could be encouraged to come together and share their expertise with one another, and with those who needed to consult with them. One way to support them would be to create a suitable sanctuary that would house the priests and help them study and practice. Conveniently, the Freeborn have secured the right to construct just such a sanctuary on the Isle of Orsini with the treaty they have signed, and half of the remaining Justicars are keen to return, and eager to show the Grendel that they have not been defeated or driven off. The Isle has been their home for centuries, and though the white granite pillars are gone, building the sanctuary here would be a clear way to send a signal that the Freeborn are not giving up on Feroz. Of course, such a gesture would not be without risk. The Grendel will not break the treaty they have signed without provocation, but it will only last for 2 years. If Lord Rahab were to turn against the Empire after the treaty expired, or be replaced by a less diplomatic governor, then the Orcs might crush the Enclave with ease. Other locations in the Brass Coast are possible and would clearly be safer. There are plenty of spaces that would provide a supportive atmosphere for study and meditation, such as the peaks of Braden's Yas or the windswept plains of the Jade Range in Karaman. But there are several islands in Calvos Sound that are uninhabited, save for sheep and puffins, that would further cement the connection between the Justicars and the sea. The battlefields of the Iron Plains in Segura represent perhaps the most haunted location in the entire Brass Coast, which is not saying much, of course. And while there is some risk to the Jotun Orcs, or at least from them, they could also provide a good location for a sanctuary dedicated to the study of the dead. However, of course, being offered the chance to rebuild your enclave on your home soil, or soil you're unfamiliar with, I'm sure would be met with resistance from the Justicars. The Imperial Senate could commission a sanctuary for the Justicars in the Brass Coast, and regardless of where it was built, it would provide a place for the freeborn priests interested in exorcism to study and share their skills. The treaty with the Grendel includes a provision to build the sanctuary on the island of Orsini, making it possible to commission the building here, even though Feroz is under Grendel control. The sanctuary could also be built anywhere in Madruga, Segura, or Karaman, since they are under Imperial control. It would require 15 wains of white granite and 30 crowns of resources, and over 3 months to complete. But, once done, The title would be appointed by the Brass Coast National Assembly and serve for a year. It would be appropriate to make the title responsible for dealing with the unquiet dead and ghosts in the Brass Coast, and since the Brass Coast is rarely troubled by such spirits, the Senate could grant the position wider responsibilities for organising the few freeborn exorcists who attend Anvil, and directing them to deal with threats encountered through the Sentinel Gate as well. And as a veteran of one skirmish against a wraith, I can tell you that having a calm and collected exorcist is quite the asset in the right scenario. Now, with building any kind of enclave or allowing the Justicars to settle on Grendel territory provides us in the Empire an opportunity. The document that Fina y Fijados y Guerra holds explicitly forbids any act of espionage by the Justicars. The Corsairs of Shantaram, however, have an alternative suggestion, for they believe does not break the contract. During the initial visit, the freeborn priests were approached by a young woman from the nearby town of Shantaram, and for generations the Justicars were regularly supplied by boats from the Corsair town. Some of the remaining families are keen to see that situation continued, especially if it presents an opportunity to strike a blow against the conquering orcs. Under the guise of building up the small enclave on the island, it would be possible to divert weirwood and money to the freeborn of Shantaram and help them build a novel type of spy network dedicated to keeping an eye on the comings and goings of the Grendel. While focused on the coast, it would also allow them to cultivate agents in western parts of the territory and to report on sailors who would operate right under the rose of Lord Rahab, the self-styled governor of Feroz. The contract between Fina and the Speaker Morna grants her rights to settle with up to 100 Justicars on the Isle, but explicitly forbids the priests from spying on the Grendel. It says nothing about other agents, nor does it explicitly rule out spying. Obviously, Lord Rahab is unlikely to be happy if he discovers the Empire is spying on him, regardless of what might be written in treaties or contracts. But it would not breach the agreement that Fina made with Speaker Morna. It would be the Corsairs that were doing the spying after all. Furthermore, unless something went seriously wrong, there would be no way for the Grendel to easily find out about the spies operating in the conquered territory. Now, the Imperial Senate could commission a special spy network in Feroz, and this would cost 5 wains of weirwood and 10 crowns and take about 3 months to set up. But it would also have an upkeep, 2 thrones every season. The spy network would need to be supplied or powered by fleets rather than military units as they usually are. It would be specifically designed to be supported by ship captains rather than soldiers. And with the Broken Shore bounty rendered meaningless by the peace treaty, there are Corsairs in both Feroz and Madruga itching for a chance to take action against the Grendel. This spy network would allow them such an opportunity. Funneling the materials to the Corsairs could be done under the cover of building the Enclave, and it would require a Senate commission, the cost as mentioned, and once finished, it would make a special commission that would function just like a spy network, except that it would benefit from fleet support rather than military. Now, the decision on this does not need to be made immediately, but there is only a narrow window to take advantage of it. If it's not commissioned by the end of spring in 384, the opportunity will be lost. Now, this tale may not interest those of you who are not freeborn blood. However, well, firstly, the freeborn are part of our empire, and we should treat them like the family that they are. Secondly, I'm sure all of us would enjoy a good opportunity to give Grendel, if not a bloody nose, then maybe just peek behind the curtain and see what they're doing. And of course, when we aim to come back and liberate Feroz after 2 years have passed, I personally believe that this spy network would be most valuable. But anyway, that's enough politicking. I hope all of you travel well and calmly, and remember that as the days grow longer and the nights shorter, each time the sun rises is one less sunrise, and so you get to see the glory of Anvil once more.